The Disasta in Alaska, starring the cheeseburger-eating surrender monkey. We have, to quote Winston Churchill, suffered a defeat without a war because we forget. We do not merely have an evil, deranged president. We have an evil, deranged president who is also a moron. And today, Trump, Putin's butt boy, Putin's errand carrier, will deliver Putin's message to Zelensky in Washington. And Zelensky will be accompanied by EU President von der Leyen, NATO Secretary General Rutte, Presidents Macron of France and Stubb of Finland, Prime Minister Starmer of the UK and Meloni of Italy, Chancellor Merz of Germany, and Trump will be accompanied by a large selection of mirrors. From the Disasta in Alaska to the Nazi-occupied territory of Washington, D.C. I hope they wrote down for Trump the message Putin expects him to relay, because otherwise he will think Putin wanted him to tell Zelensky that Trump really won the 2020 election and that voting by mail is unreliable, even though Russia has voting by mail established in 2020 by Putin. But Trump's takeaway from all that was, he's right and Joe Biden is the devil. Trump is an utter imbecile. He is like a lazy Susan of incompetence, evil, and farting. You never know which, in a given 24-hour period, he will express the most of. 72 hours after the farce at Anchorage, we have some idea of what Trump's impression of Neville Chamberlain consisted of. Trump's most recent addition to his clown car dictatorship is named Steve Witkoff. And Steve Witkoff was previously known only in New York, only for tenant complaints in his apartment buildings, and he once tried to illegally raise the rent on a mere 18,000 residents at a time. And per the website The Observer, quote, used to carry a gun while collecting rents. Despite all that, Witkoff is still a clown, a twerp, and most importantly, a mark, a sucker, a dupe. He went on CNN yesterday claiming that Putin had agreed to, quote, legislative enshrinement within the Russian Federation not to go after any other territories when the peace deal is codified. And he added legislative enshrinement in the Russian Federation not to go after any other European countries and violate their sovereignty. Now, that's Neville Chamberlain in 1938, because those Putin promises are Hitler 1938 at Munich about Czechoslovakia, and they were all lies, as Putin's promises to this idiot Witkoff are all lies. It is bad enough to platform Putin and debase U.S. soldiers by having them literally kneel before Putin and roll out a red carpet for Putin, but it is something else altogether to believe and propagate the lies Putin is smearing all over your face, Witkoff. You mark, you sucker, you dupe. Actually, I take back what I said before. I hope they did not write Putin's message to Zelensky and Europe down for Trump, because if they did, one of Trump's delegation of dopes presumably left what they wrote down, along with the 8 pages of confidential phone numbers and pronunciation guides, in the printer, in the business center, in the Hotel Captain Cook, 20 minutes from Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in beautiful downtown Anchorage, Alaska. 8 pages of things like how to pronounce the name Putin. P-O-O-T-I-H-N. Just think, poo. Also, this listed where everybody was supposed to sit and what their phone numbers were at the Hotel Captain Cook. And when Trump was supposed to give Putin his commemorative gift. And this was a surprise. The commemorative gift was not the Donetsk region of Ukraine. No, it was an American bald eagle desk statue. American bald eagle, you say? I assume that's Stephen Miller? Who left the documents there? I'm betting on the idiot who thinks that the German bad guy was named Hilter and that it's
the Nobel Peace Prize.
And who is dumber than a box of 200 pounds of rocks, the press secretary. Oh, I left it inside. What's missing in the absolute and absolutely justifiable disgust that one of the other occupants of the Trump clown car left the itinerary in the printer in the business center at the place they went to when they couldn't get into Motel 6 or wherever, is that the key events at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, we know from these documents, were held in the Billy Mitchell room. And if the bitterness of the irony of the Billy Mitchell room is not immediately apparent to you, let me explain. Billy Mitchell was an American hero, the American World War I pilot, witness to the Wright brothers in 1908, who almost alone realized then, or a decade after he saw the Wright brothers, that all subsequent war would be decided not by ships, but by planes and other lighter-than-air craft. As his bosses branded him a lunatic, in 1921, he got them to let him send some rickety biplanes with 2,000-pound bombs to sink the captured World War I German dreadnought, the Ostfriesland. And they all laughed as the giant boat took bomb after bomb after bomb for the first two bombing runs and barely moved. And then on the third run, Mitchell's handful of planes hit it just right, and it spun like a rotisserie oven roller and sank within seconds. And Mitchell's bosses ignored the meaning of what they saw. But the Japanese observers, who the 1921 equivalents of Pete Hegseth and Kash Patel invited to watch this demonstration live, said it was an extraordinary event, and they had so much to learn from it. Our government wound up court-martialing Billy Mitchell, but the Japanese went home, and a couple of years later, Mitchell said that one fine Sunday morning they'd be back in a squadron to attack some of our Pacific bases, like, he picked one at random, Pearl Harbor. In the Billy Mitchell room, Donald Trump hosted the Disasta in Alaska. And now to the Nazi-occupied territory of Washington and the meeting with Zelensky, and especially Rutte. Rutte has already proven he can manipulate Trump's ego at least as well as Putin can. It is there today that boss hog Trump will deliver Putin's message, or Trump's version of it, whatever Trump can remember through his brain-damaged, self-obsessed haze, or whatever they didn't leave on the printer. I suspect he will tell Zelensky that the way to achieve an end to the war in Ukraine is to lose. It is amazing to think that maybe the big picture of what happens when we have a psychopathic narcissist running the country into the ground is not just the death of Ukraine and the loss of security for Europe, but maybe that isn't the big picture. What Trump has shown Putin again and again and again, and as recently as Friday, is that he has no conception of why countries fight or what is meant by the word territory. He hears about land and regions and occupation, and he thinks somebody wants to trade a duplex in Trump Tower for a 4-bedroom in Trump World Tower. Nothing else makes sense to him. This isn't life or death or freedom or tyranny. It's like the rest of the world is to Trump. It's a real estate deal. And in revealing this to Putin, he lays out, as the Americans laid out to the Japanese visitors at Billy Mitchell's Flying Circus, how to defeat this country in a land war in the next 4 years. Simply seize any building that still has the word Trump on it, and he will hand you anything if only you'll give it back to him, especially if you have seized what is now the most important piece of land in the world to Trump, the new parking lot he put up when he paved over the paradise that had been the White House lawn. There are too many comparisons between Trump and Ukraine and Neville Chamberlain and Czechoslovakia. The problem with them is Chamberlain was naive and wrong, but he wasn't Trump. He didn't think it was a good meeting because Hitler invited him to go for a beer next time he was in Germany. Chamberlain screwed up. I mean, he screwed up. But Trump is worse. Trump is screwed up. The message from Putin, Trump thinks was a triumph, by the way, actually boils down to, next time you're in Russia, Donald, try and find me. Quote, let's be clear, said a TV political commentator. The so-called summit with Vladimir Putin did absolutely nothing to advance any American interests in any way. That's a fact. Instead, Vladimir received a massive platform in exchange for zero concessions whatsoever, and then Putin used that platform to take shot after shot after shot at our country, the United States of America. And what do we get in return for this grand gesture that will enrich Vladimir Putin and Russia? Nothing. We got nothing. Appeasement doesn't work, has never worked, never will work. Unquote. The TV commentator was Sean Hannity. And the date of that commentary was June 16th, 2021. And the president meeting with Putin was President Biden, and it wasn't in the Days Inn at Wasilla. It was in Geneva, and the quote was unearthed by John Passantino at the news site Status, and Sean Hannity is a whore, and Donald Trump is an idiot, and what Zelensky and the European leaders should do today is tell Trump that Ukraine and the EU and its member nations have thought real hard about it, and they are now withdrawing their recognition of the government of the United States of America because we are just too effing stupid. Oh, I forgot the coup de grace. Melania wrote a letter. Melania wrote a letter to Putin calling for peace in Ukraine, for the protection of innocent children. If Melania Trump gave a shit about the protection of innocent children, she'd write a letter to her goddamned husband. A letter to Putin about protecting people. It's so pathetic and so useless that Melania Trump has suddenly made herself into a candidate to join the Democratic leadership in the House. The Disasta in Alaska. Now, about the Nazi-occupied territory of Washington, D.C., we need to face the fact that Trump has declared war against the United States of America. There is no national emergency in D.C. or anywhere else. There certainly is nothing in D.C. that is as bad as it is in Ohio, West Virginia, and South Carolina, whose governors are Trump whores, and who have now decided to seek to curry favor with the Fuhrer by sending their own National Guard troops to Washington to now double the number present there, even though nearly all the troops are being sent not into the areas of D.C. that actually have some violence, but to the areas that have some liberals. To say nothing of the analysis of Philip Bump, ex of the Washington Post. You remember the Washington Post. It used to be a newspaper. Quote, the FBI reported that fully 43 cities in those three states, Ohio, West Virginia, and South Carolina, had higher rates of violent crime in 2024 than did D.C. More than 1.2 million people live in those cities, including more than 900,000 in Ohio alone. Yet that state's National Guard is being deployed to D.C. to protect the capital's 700,000-odd residents. 500,000 Ohioans live in cities with higher homicide rates than D.C. One disaster has been forestalled. District Attorney Bondi rewrote her order that superimposed the head of the DEA over the mayor and the police chief of the District of Columbia. That's what they told the court anyway, because Bondi was about to get her balls handed to her by the judge in the lawsuit against her. What are they telling the public? From Politico, quote, in a statement, White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson said the Trump administration, quote, is not backing down, and that the new order requires city officials, quote, to comply fully and completely with federal immigration law and authorities, unquote. This leaves in place the possibility of what might be the best possible outcome here, the prospect of Trump's brown shirts fighting the actual police of District Columbia. Now, if this sounds crazy to you, D.C. police versus the National Guard, let me tell you about June 16th, 1857. It is called the New York City Police Riot, or as they called it then, the Great Police Riot, in front of City Hall, which looked then pretty much the way it looks now, with a bunch of steps near what would become the Brooklyn Bridge 30 years later. They had dissolved the New York Municipal Police because the mayor, Fernando Wood, had been abused by them and had abused them, and the city of New York was in turmoil. And there had been formed a second New York City Police Department called the Metropolitan Police. And so on June 16th, 1857, the New York Municipal Police and the New York Metropolitan Police duked it out on the steps of City Hall. How could a shoot 'em out on the streets of D.C. be the best possible outcome? Because it would be cops shooting National Guard and not, civilians. We are headed for something like this. People are going to get shot, probably within months, probably since this is being staged in Washington. It is being test run in Washington, probably in Washington, while one person in D.C. is going to try to seize control of the city either before or after the midterms, and you can guess who that is. So be prepared. And now we rejoin the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, already in progress. There have been a lot of cease and desist letters flying around, so let me just quote somebody, quoting somebody else. On the website Blue Sky, I saw Josh Marshall of TPM posting photos provided by somebody called Quentin Thomas, photos posted by Marshall from Mr. Thomas of a book by a man named Andrew Lowney about another man called Prince Andrew, and the book is called Entitled, and it was just published in the United Kingdom. In Andrew Lowney's book, as photographed by Mr. Quentin Thomas and posted by Mr. Marshall, Mr. Lowney writes, and I've adjusted this slightly, quote, in 2007, somebody told one author that he had facilitated the relationship between somebody else and his future wife, another somebody else. It follows that with a quote passage, indented, attributed to somebody else, and dated 2007. Quote, the first time somebody had sex with somebody else was on my plane. Little did somebody else know, I beat him to the punch by a year. Speaking of Epstein polling, G. Elliott Morris's Strength in Numbers notes a new poll from the Canadian firm Leger finds that 47% of Republicans say they would still vote for Trump even if he were implicated in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Two things. A, this poll was covered as if that's a shockingly small amount of GOP defection, but given we know how loyal partisans are, I think, Morris writes, 53% of a base saying they'd look elsewhere is notable and high But B, be careful with headlines like these. Studies have found people are very bad at predicting how they'd behave in the future given new information, namely in that they overestimate change. I would point out that if 53% of Trump's Republican supporters would bail on him in this poll, and that number is double what actually happens, that would mean that a quarter of Trump's Republican supporters would bail on him. That would be enough. Meanwhile, in polling from YouGov, a total of 36% of American adults say that jobs and inflation are their number one priority. It had been 28% during the first month of this Trump second term, now 36%. It is now equal to the high point of that number. Jobs and inflation are their number one priority, 36%. That is the high watermark of the Joe Biden presidency. The rest of these numbers are from Pew Research, and this is Trump approval. He's 5 points underwater among white people, 68 points underwater among blacks, 43% underwater among Hispanics, 35 points underwater among Asians. Ages 18 to 29, he's 33 points underwater. 30 to 49, 31 points underwater. But of course, his base, the older folks, aged 50 to 64, 9 points underwater. Ages 65 and up, 9 points underwater. So of everybody in the country over the age of 50, Donald Trump's disapproval is 53 or 54%. He's 13 points underwater amongst males. Women, 28% underwater. High school degree or less, 15 points underwater. College graduate, 31% or less. Postgraduate, 33% or less. And as an aside, that difference, 31% for college grads, 33% for postgraduates, underscores the theory I've had since childhood that you do not need to go to anything beyond college. Anyway, back to it. He's net minus 22. Approval, 38%. Disapproval, 60%. Back to the big picture, Morris also notes Pew looks at the crosstabs of their Trump approval rating data. It was 47% approval for Trump when the term started. It is 38% now. And it concludes Trump's rating has slipped more among his younger voters than among older adults who had voted for him. A few weeks in, Trump's job approval rating among those who had voted for him varied little by age, Morris writes. 9 in 10 or more Trump voters under 35 approved of his job performance. Same as in the older age groups. Today, Trump's rating remains overwhelmingly high among his voters ages 50 and older, but it has slipped among the younger voters. 69% of Trump voters under 35 now approve. That's 23 points less than at the start of the term. 23 points less. It was 92% approval among younger voters. It is now 69. About a third of the young people who voted for Trump do not approve of him as president. While this is extraordinarily good news in terms of elections, if we still have them, it is bad news because, as dumb as he is, Trump read these too, or more likely had somebody read them to him. The worse he is doing, the more he senses reality is cornering him, and the more troops he will bring onto the streets of the blue cities, just waiting for the chance to shoot you. The overarching lesson this week, from sea to shining sea, from the Disasta in Alaska to the Nazi-occupied territory of Washington, D.C., is that Donald Trump has declared war on the United States of America. Also of interest here, it's happened. The monkeys have written all of Shakespeare. Somebody has won the lottery. and not blown the money on a 700,000 square foot palace made out of ketchup. And Piers Morgan has done something journalistic. Piers Morgan has posted a meme of Trump on his way to Alaska to meet Putin, wherein Trump is shown wearing bright red knee pads. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this edition of Countdown, I had the pleasure of reading a comment over the weekend in which it was claimed that the HBO Aaron Sorkin series Newsroom was the worst episodic or film depiction of journalism, TV or otherwise, in the history of the English language. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Somebody else knows. But I must say, worst in the history of the English language, I think that's exaggerating. It was not nearly that good. But what made it even worse was the astonishing amount of dialogue Sorkin allegedly cut and pasted from other people. Figuratively, in the case of me, literally, according to a friend of mine who was his ex-girlfriend, and said he cut and pasted stuff out of her emails to him and turned them into dialogue. My dad says it there, and then it comes out of Jeff Daniels' mouth over there next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, international fop Piers Morgan, disgraced ex-British journalist and disgraced ex-American journalist. It's a hell of a combo, Piers. Hours before the Disasta in Alaska began, he tweeted, "As President Donald Trump lands in Alaska, I wish him the very best of luck in trying to secure an end to the horrendous war in Ukraine. It's refreshing to see a U.S. president who genuinely prefers peace to war." Beneath that is a picture of Trump at the top of the stairs at Air Force One, waving. If this is an actual picture of Trump, he's waving to no crowd. He's just posing for a photograph. He does this every time he gets to the top of the stairs. He waves whether there's somebody there or not. We think he knows there's nobody there, but nobody's sure. But the key ingredient here is he's wearing not just bright red knee pads over his pants, but they look like they're from roller derby. I mean, these knee pads would be way too much for the National Football League in the 1930s. I mean, they are knee pads the size of his neck. Bright red knee pads with, I might add, supporting straps both on top and below what appear to be plastic. They look kind of like baseball catcher's shin guards and knee pads. Piers Morgan wishing Trump luck as he goes to Alaska to meet Putin wearing knee pads. Morgan, the hacking the voicemail guy, deleted this tweet and reposted it with a different photo without explanation. When other posters asked, "WTF, bub?" he blithely said he hadn't noticed the knee pads until after he posted it. He just changed photos, as one does. As one hacks Paul McCartney's voicemail, for instance. International scum. Moreover, that was the first bit of actual journalism Piers Morgan has ever done, and he deleted it. The first clever thing he's ever done. The first thing in which he did not make himself look like an asshole on at least two continents at the same time, and he deleted it. The runner-up, worser, Attorney General Pam Bondi. This is an actual post. This is presumably something that she thought of or somebody thought of, and they vetted it and they thought about it and they posted it anyway. Much like Piers Morgan. Maybe Piers Morgan posted this for them. If you touch any law enforcement officer, we will come after you. I just learned that this defendant worked at the Department of Justice. No longer. Not only is he fired, he has been charged with a felony. This is an example of the deep state we have been up against for 7 months as we work to refocus DOJ. You will not work in this administration, she said, while disrespecting our government and law enforcement. What is this? Somebody shooting a bazooka at the White House? Some terrorist with nuclear weapons? Piers Morgan posting a picture of the president wearing knee pads on his way to fellate Putin? No, sir. It is a repost of a New York Post article. D.C. man charged with felony assault after hitting federal agent with Subway sandwich. Pam Bondi and the federal government laid low by a guy throwing a sub sandwich, a hero, a hoagie, the hoagie from hell. An example of the deep state we have been up against. You touch any law enforcement officer, we will come after you, with or without lettuce. A, that should have read, if you touch any law enforcement officer, except on January 6, 2021, or if you're wearing a Trump hat. B, imagine posting this in fury and her unrighteous indignation, her self-martyring that the deep state endangered the mighty warriors from Trump's ISIS by throwing a sandwich at it. Posting this and never realizing you have made an utter fool out of yourself. And Trump ISIS. And Trump. And C, the reference to deep state. Pam Bondi's voice. Deep state, am I right? But the winners, the worst, CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin. Oh, it's bad Sorkin day. And House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. I don't know in which order they should resign, but they should both resign. These two men may be the most overrated figures in their businesses in a generation. 4 times, the smooth, shallow Sorkin insisted that the Democratic candidate for mayor of New York, Zoran Mamdani, lives in a, quote, rent-controlled apartment. Mamdani does not live in a rent-controlled apartment. He lives in what is called here a rent-stabilized apartment. There's a big difference between these two things, in addition to the fact that it's not the same words, Andrew Ross Sorkin, and you effed up in the simple business of reading words on TV, which I think is your job unless you volunteer at CNBC. Knowing people at CNBC and having worked off and on with CNBC for 27 years, it's possible he doesn't get paid for that job. Actually, there is a big difference. 22,000 apartments are rent-controlled in this city. To live in one of them, you have to have lived in it since at least 1971, or you have to have inherited it from somebody who lived in it since at least 1971. About 15 years ago, I lived in a building that had people who had been living in it since the 40s. They were in rent-controlled apartments. You really couldn't raise the rent on them, but it has to be, you have to have been there since 1971 or earlier. Zoran Mamdani was born in 1991. Mamdani lives in a rent-stabilized apartment. Half of all the apartments in New York City at all price ranges are rent-stabilized. All rent-stabilized means is the landlord can only raise the rent so much every year. It's 2.75% from 1 year to the next on a 1-year lease, or 5.25% if you want a 2-year lease. Half of all apartments in this city are rent-stabilized. Zoran Mamdani lives in one of those. I live in one of those. At least half the people I have known in the entirety of my lifetime in New York since 1959 have lived in one of those. They're not for what this buffoon Sorkin said, for poor people. They are merely for people who are not billionaires. What happened was Andrew Cuomo, who already lost the Democratic nomination, said this about Mamdani and said he lived in a rent-controlled apartment, which is not true because Cuomo cannot handle being a loser and will do anything to defeat Mamdani or anybody else. Now, Mr. Sorkin of CNBC repeated Cuomo's made-up bullshit story 4 times and said this live on the air to the minority leader, the Democratic leader in the House. One of the top 5 Democrats in the country, Hakeem Jeffries, who still has not endorsed the Democratic nominee for mayor of the city that Jeffries represents in the House. Nominee chosen by Democrats in the city that chose Jeffries, Zoran Mamdani. He's the nominee. He's not running for the nomination. He's not a candidate. He beat the crap out of Andrew Cuomo and every other Democrat, and all the other Democrats except Cuomo and Hakeem Jeffries have endorsed him.
But not Hakeem Jeffries, who's playing some other kind of game there. By the way, Jeffries did not correct Andrew Ross Sorkin, as Andrew Ross Sorkin got it wrong 4 times. Jeffries, who so far has been nearly a total disaster as House Minority Leader, he might as well be Chuck Schumer, answered not with an endorsement of Mamdani, finally, nor a repudiation of Cuomo's falsehood that this lazy, sloppy, overrated clown Sorkin repeated. But he said, quote, "It's a legitimate issue that has been raised, and the Mamdani campaign is going to address it." First off, that's a stronger phrase than he's used about Trump. Secondly, Congressman Jeffries, it isn't a legitimate issue. It's a lie. And it's a lie you didn't correct when afforded that opportunity. It is a smear against your party's candidate, who you have not endorsed, a candidate who has won something already, unlike the great job you did in the House elections last year. And the issue that has to be raised is, why are you still the minority leader? Why are you the lead Democrat in the House? Why, at best, don't you know the difference between New York City rent-controlled apartments and New York City rent-stabilized apartments when you represent New York effing City in Congress? Hakeem Jeffries and Andrew Wrong Sorkin. Twerps. Resign, leave, take that lying shit Cuomo with you. Today's other worst persons in the world! Finally, our number 1 story in the countdown, things I promised not to tell, and back to my favorite topic, me. I heard Jeff Daniels say the words, and in the next minute, my cell phone rang. It was an ex-girlfriend. While we were talking, an email arrived from another ex-girlfriend, and then in came a text from the current girlfriend at her folks' house. Then 2 more emails, and before I was off the phone, 2 voicemails. And then regular friends started to contact me. This is just over 10 years ago now. It was Sunday, August 5th, 2012. Jeff Daniels was playing the controversial newscaster and commentator on Aaron Sorkin's HBO series Newsroom, which was based structurally on me and Countdown, and I know this because Aaron Sorkin told me so before he filmed any of it. And I know this because he asked me if he could base the pilot episode on what happened to me at MSNBC in the spring and summer of 2010. And I know this because he came in and shadowed the staff of Countdown for 2 days to get the feel for the place. And I know this because he wound up basing one character, Maggie Jordan, on my assistant, Margaret Judson, and then hiring Margaret Judson as a consultant, and then hiring her as an actress to play a part that wasn't supposed to be her. And I know this because he was furious when I would not fly to Denver, I think it was, to do a cameo in the pilot. And I know this because he said he was hiring me as a consultant. And I know this because I never saw a dime out of it. This was the second time Aaron Sorkin had based one of his TV series on one of my TV series. The other was called Sports Night, and Esquire magazine once asked me to interview Sorkin about Sports Night, and I asked him the real tough question. What was the origin of Sports Night? And his answer was, quote, "You are the origin." So when the New York Times had called me about Newsroom, I lightheartedly said it was nice to know in advance this time that Aaron Sorkin was making a TV series about me. Sorkin did not like this at all. And he told all his actors to tell all their interviewers that this was not true, and I know that because Jeff Daniels told me that that was what Sorkin had told him. Sorkin is interesting. I had known him for about 10 or 12 years when he came into Countdown to see what it looked and felt like, and he was 20 minutes late. And my assistant, Margaret, after whom he named Maggie Jordan, whom he then hired away from me, and whom he finally hired as an actress to play Tess Weston, and she was great, by the way. Margaret brings him in, and he apologizes for being late, and he says he's staying in a hotel 2 blocks away, and he should have just walked, but instead he got in a car. And the next thing he knew, he was 6 blocks away, caught in traffic caused by the complete shutdown of one of the crosstown streets for midday construction. And I laughed, and I said, well, like my late father, the architect, used to say, New York, it'll be a great town whenever they finish it. And he laughed, and I laughed, and 2 years later, in the 7th episode of the HBO Newsroom series, first aired on August 5th, 2012, and re-aired throughout the week, Jeff Daniels as the anchorman Will McAvoy, who wasn't me, but actually kind of was me, is late to his newsroom because he gets caught in Manhattan traffic caused by Sunday night street construction, and he says to his exasperated producer, New York, it'll be a great town whenever they finish it. That's when my phone and email blew up, and the then girlfriend and like 40% of all of my exes ever all had the same question. New York, it'll be a great town whenever they finish it? Isn't that what your dad used to say? Even the ones who never met my dad knew this because I used to quote him constantly. Because the real humor in the quote is the fact that my dad was an architect and construction was his business. New York, it'll be a great town whenever they finish it. And then, one of the last of the exes reached out. She waited until the show was over. Now, I don't think any of us is proud of this, but she had also dated Sorkin once or twice. And since she had written celebrity stories for a New York newspaper, he had later asked her by email what the world of gossip reporting was like, and she told him by email. And what she now told me made Aaron Sorkin's use of my dad's quote and other parts of my life seem like possible coincidences. She said she was watching the 3rd, maybe 4th episode of Newsroom, and in walked a new character, a gossip columnist, a woman. And the first sentence the character said was, my friend and ex said, word for word, something she had sent to Sorkin in one of the emails about the gossip business. She said when she heard it, her face started to get red, and it would keep getting redder. The gossip columnist character's second line had also been cut and pasted from my ex's email. Then her long speech, then all of her dialogue, she said, in her second scene. My ex actually managed to record that episode and to find her own email to Sorkin and to compare them, and she said other than changing a couple of tenses, he had used her answers verbatim. I met the actor Josh Charles during the 2000 World Series. I was there anchoring it for Fox Sports. Josh was there promoting his new show on Fox. Josh had played Dan Rydell on Sorkin's Sports Night series, and even Sorkin and I agree Dan Rydell is just me with a different haircut. I was walking up 6th Avenue one day in October 2000, and from several blocks away, I saw Josh Charles walking towards me. So I had several minutes to prepare what I could say to him. This was not spontaneous, sadly. But after our eyes met and I smiled and he gave me that, yes, I'm on TV look that I recognize and have myself deployed, he switched suddenly to shock and even a little apprehension. And I said the line I had been rehearsing in my head for several minutes. Excuse me, you don't get to say this often in life, but didn't you used to play me on TV? Right there on 6th Avenue, Josh told me about the ordeal of working with and for Aaron Sorkin, and I thought he just meant for actors. But I later found out, because New York, it'll be a great town whenever they finish it. Josh and I are still friends. We've gone to ball games together. We were in a fantasy baseball league together, and one night on my ESPN2 show, we came back from commercial, giving the audience no warning or explanation, and we simply started co-anchoring the show and calling it Sports Night and making references to the program and to Newsroom. And then he said, "Why did we keep reading this?" And I said, "I don't know. I just assumed Sorkin had run out of new ideas." The mutual laughter that followed was sincere. There is one more punchline to the Newsroom Sorkin story, because I was like his 7th guest ever. When Stephen Colbert wrapped up the Colbert Report on Comedy Central, I was invited to be on the final farewell episode. Me and like 99 other people. There were so many of us, ranging from Barry Manilow to Bryan Cranston to Big Bird, that they had like 9 green rooms in the Comedy Central building. And I get there and they send me to the green room I would be sharing with several other people, and I trudge up a bunch of stairs to the top floor, and in this big room there is only one other performer there yet. It's Jeff Daniels. Without saying hello, he says, "Now wait, let me explain. Sorkin told me," and I explained, and then he explained, and then I explained some more, and Jeff said, "Oh," a lot. And once he said, "Oops," and Sorkin didn't tell me that. And after about 3 minutes, he said, "So I owe you an apology." And I said, "No, you don't. It's not your fault." And he smiled and he said, "Well, great, I'm glad. So can we take a picture together that I can put out on Twitter?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. But only if you capture it New York. It'll be a great town whenever they finish it." I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Most of our countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, our musical directors of Countdown, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel, therefore, by process of elimination, handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, appears courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, Johnny Banks. Everything else was, as always, my fault. That's Countdown for today, day 211 of America held hostage again. Just 1,252 days until the scheduled end of his lame duck and lame-brained term, unless he is removed sooner by MAGA and Jeffrey Epstein or the actuarial tables, or Caroline Leavitt leaves him in the business center in the hotel in Anchorage. Till next time, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.